we are going to be focusing on decomposing the work that's in our scope statement into our deliverables, and it will also give us our timeline. In the last session, we identified our key stakeholders and how to deal with them strategically. And this session's focus is breaking down the project work into manageable components or chunks. And that, in turn, is what's going to give us our deliverables. So in Module 2, we talked about scope, and that kind of gave us our boundaries. And we discussed stakeholder management and engagement in Module 3, and that told us how to keep our team accountable. And the work breakdown structure tells us what our team actually is to do, why work breakdown structure matters. Because you can't budget what you can't structure. Without a work breakdown structure, the work to be done is vague. And with the clear breakdown structure, you can assign the work, we can figure out what our deliverables need to be, and we can figure out a realistic timeline. Just a reminder about components 2 and 3, which are due next week, at least the drafts for those two components. Today's module is going to complete the framework for component 3. And that's the work breakdown and your timeline. And you should use these frameworks to organize your work. Our first video today is Adriana Girdler talking about work breakdown structure best practices. So we'll watch this video and then we'll discuss it. She talks about the overall deliverable. What is the overall deliverable and how does the work breakdown structure help you get that? What is the overall deliverable for your project? Well, I think you can probably make it even simpler, that it is delivering what the project is designed to do, which is to lower customer dissatisfaction through having a, what do you call the plan where you meet them? Through a meet and assist program, right? That's the overall deliverable, right? That's why you're doing this project, right? And Brigesh, what is your overall deliverable? Yeah, so if you're moving towards in the direction that we spoke about last week, about focusing on the packaging as the sub-project, as part of this bigger project, then the overall deliverable is the packaging itself that meets the certain criteria that you've set out for it as far as being sustainable and so forth. Do you see how that's important to know what your overall deliverable is? Because then everything else kind of flows from that. And how does the work breakdown structure help you achieve that?
Tasks that will make up big picture.
Exactly. Smaller components, I think you said, into tasks, or as Adriana Girdler says, into manageable chunks. So you have an idea of what your overall deliverable is. That's the reason for creating your project. And the work breakdown structure is going to give you the manageable chunks that will let you accomplish that.
Even the identifying the risk of doing.
Exactly. She mentioned that this is also now going to help you understand the risks, because you see how the different components interact with each other, and you'll see that there's risks involved in that. That's very good. She talked about the 4 different levels. Do you remember that? What is at level 1? The benefits? Well, she had an even overall deliverables. Maybe not. Maybe those come a little bit further down. The way Adriana describes it, that's your concept and your idea. It's really simple. Right. So, Brugesh, in your instance, on level 1, it's to find and procure sustainable packaging for our MVP. That's the concept and that's the idea. Right? So you want to use level 1 to really help you understand what your overall deliverable is. By understanding it, that's the concept and the idea of what you are going to be delivering on. And then level 2, anyone remember how she described level 2? They're a high level, and she uses a particular term. High level what?
Buckets.
Buckets, thank you, yes. Now, bucket, that implies it's a container of some sort. So level 1 is your concept and your idea. And next you have your high level buckets. Now you are starting to define perhaps your deliverables. Like what elements do you need on level 2 at a high level that will contain the results the results of your concept? What should those high level buckets contain? Well, one, I kind of mentioned deliverables, right? Those are your deliverables. What else? Stakeholders, yes, yeah, I could see that. That's who is responsible for what delivering on the different high-level buckets. I can see that. Also, the milestones. And a big takeaway of this section of the video when she was talking about that is that you need to be getting buy-in at this level. She said you could do this on your own, but if you don't involve the team, you're not going to be getting buy-in, which is so critical at this stage, because this is where you're defining at a high level what is going to be delivered. She mentioned that your work breakdown structure needs to be aligned with scope. Why is that important?
Have the deliverables which we are working on. So,
yeah, it's kind of self-evident that if you're working on your work breakdown structure and it's not relating back to your scope statement, well, maybe you need to go back to your scope statement. Or you either need to go back to your scope statement to change it, perhaps, or you need to go back to your scope statement to inform what the work that you're doing on your work breakdown structure and change the direction that you're going in on your work breakdown structure. But they need to be aligned. And you see how I hope that this is now kind of helping you figure out what your case study and project is going to entail, because all these parts need to work together. Another thing that she mentioned is that you go back to your scope statement, it kind of gives you your ins and your outs. So you know where things start and where they stop. She mentioned using verbs for level 4. What was she talking about? Verbs, using verbs for level 4. And I guess, let me back up a little bit. So we talked about level 1, that's your concept and your idea. Level 2 is your high-level buckets. Level 3, I suppose, would be more of your strategic buckets that
identify your scope.
Yeah. Scope statement for level 4. For 3, well, yeah, your scope statement, you need to be in alignment across all your buckets. But we're getting more and more specific, right? So we're starting out with the concept and the idea. Then we're going to like our high-level buckets, our deliverables, and our milestones. Level 3, I suppose that could be a little bit more of the different elements that make up the high-level bucket, which might be some more deliverables and milestones that all tie into that second level, that high-level bucket. But by the time you get to level 4, she said, use verbs. What did she mean by that? It's a good way to phrase what is contained in level 4. Perfect. That's beautifully said. That's exactly what, by the time you get to level 4, make sure that every item on level 4 has a verb attached with it, like create. And that's where you're describing the actual actions that need to be taken in order to fill the buckets, in order to the actions to fill the level 3 buckets. And then the level 3 buckets will fill the level 2 bucket, the high level bucket. And then all of those high level buckets support your concept and your idea. And in turn, you've just described your overall deliverable, right? So you can look at it from the top down, or you can look at it, these are the tasks, these are the actions that need to fill the buckets above, which are the deliverables, milestones, resources, stakeholders. All of that is defined by these other levels. And you work your way all the way back up to the top. Everything supports your key concept and idea. What are some other action words that we could use on level 4? Create, what else? What is that? Tactical tasks, right. That's another way to describe that. That's the more formal way to describe level 4. So, but she gives us a way to think about what is a tactical task, is it has an action word. So it might be things that we create. What else would be an action word that would describe a tactical task on level 4? Build. How about build?
Yeah.
What else? Just a second. What is that? Measure. Yeah. Right? So we have to measure to get some sort of statistics or some understanding about a situation. So we have create, build, measure, Brugesh. Generate. Yeah, exactly. So these are ways to ensure that what we're describing is a tactical task, as you said, Margaret. And then she kind of ended with transferring that to your project plan. So my question to you is, how does your work breakdown structure affect your project plan? What's the result of doing this work breakdown structure on your project plan?
With the flow, with the project.
Yeah, that's perfect. Let me see if I could think about what you just said. So it's the backbone.
Yeah.
That's right? So think the work breakdown structure is the backbone of your project. Another thing you said, and those are all great points, I'm trying to remember them all, about it shows accountability for your team. It identifies who does what. Well, you touched on so many things. What are some of the other things that you mentioned?
Also the overall project
Milestones, yes. And milestones are part of what?
The entire timeline of the project.
The entire timeline of your project. Yeah, so this is where it all begins and ends. We can't think of this in abstract, right? All the other stuff, identifying stakeholders, scope statement, knowing what's in and what's out, all really important. But as you're doing all that, you're really all that work is to prepare you for creating a really solid work breakdown structure. And this then feeds your entire project plan. So like I talked about, it's not a one-way street. You go to each step and that affects what you did before. You come down and now what you did up here, what you changed here is going to affect what comes down here. And so you're going to be working back and forth, which is why doing a rough draft and keeping up with these, the assignments as far as turning into rough drafts is really important. It's going to allow you to do the right amount of back and forth to have a really solid plan. Now, I'd like you to find a clean, go to the next page in your notebook, write down today's date, write down module 4, and then at the top of the page, write how I will organize my WBS. And think about your approach and your strategy. You don't want to be writing exactly how the specifics of your particular case study, but it's your strategy, your approach. How are you going to organize it? By phase, by deliverable type, or maybe some other way? And what's your level 1 going to contain? And here, I think you can, if you have an idea for your project, what is the concept and the idea that you're going to deliver within your project? How are you going to determine what your high-level buckets are? So take about 8 minutes and write about your strategy and your thinking. As I always say, there's no right or wrong answer. The important thing is that you just think strategically about how you're going to approach that. If you're not finished up, that's okay. You can come back. Just leave yourself some room, like skip to another page when we do the next reflection, and you can come back and continue your thoughts. But now, continuing on what we just spoke about, let's listen to Adriana Girdler describe some top work breakdown structure mistakes and how to avoid them. Why is having a really well-structured work breakdown structure a game changer? Yeah, again, it's kind of self-evident, but if it's really well maintained and organized, it's going to affect everything. It affects who's doing what. It keeps people accountable. It defines your milestones, your deliverables. Like I say, it's kind of self-evident, or at least it should be at this point. What does a work breakdown structure allow you to do? What does it give you, provide you?
And knows exactly what you're doing.
Very good. Removes clarity, adds clarity, removes confusion, gives accountability. What else does it do? And again, we're kind of repeating ourselves, but it bears repeating. What else do we talk about that? What does it deliver? It delivers our deliverables. And the other thing that she mentioned that I don't think she mentioned in the last video is it allows you to create an action plan. And remember, that's something that I talked about in the very first session, that this project plan is going to be actionable. And what is an action plan? But actionable steps that people can take. So I hope you're getting to see how important the right level of detail is. Why is it important that your work breakdown structure is aligned with your scope? Exactly. You lose time and you waste your budget on unrelated things. A term that she used is it's easy to get lost in the weeds. Once you start working, it's really hard to see through the weeds to what you need to focus on. These are kind of, again, self-evident and kind of things that she spoke about in the previous video, but it's good to think about it really carefully because it is really that important. What happens if you don't break down the work, you don't decompose it down to those action words? Well, it gets kind of confusing, doesn't it? If you don't have that level 4 that says, this is the action that needs to take place, then it's confusing as to what needs to happen, what needs to be done. So I hope you're starting to really get why I was encouraging some of you not to be too expansive in the project that you're going to be doing here, and that you work your way back and forth from the work breakdown structure to your scope statement, to your stakeholders, and this is all fluid. And that's one thing that she mentioned, that your work breakdown structure is a living document, right? What does she mean by that? Exactly. It's not a one-time creation. It's something that we update. And just like if this was a real project and not a theoretical project that you're doing for the class, you can simulate some of that living document quality of it between now and the 8 modules we're going to cover, and then the independent study time you're going to have to put all this together. Treat it as a living document. Go back to your scope statement, refine your scope statement. Based on that, go back to your work breakdown structure, refine your work breakdown structure. You'll actually be modeling the sort of work that you will need to do on a live project by treating it as a living document. And another term that I like to use, I mentioned it in relation to our syllabus, is it's a single point of truth. That's where the most up-to-date, relevant information should reside. She talked also about the 4 levels, and she used a little bit different terminology. But she's describing obviously the same things. Does anyone remember what she said for level 1 in this video? I'll just go ahead and tell you. So on level 1, she said that's the project name. But before she said that's the object, what did she just, the idea and the concept.
Clear objectives.
Yeah, but the concept and the idea, that is your project name, right? That, like for Brugesh, right now, it could evolve, but it's to source and deliver sustainable packaging for the MVP, right? Something like that. So that is your project name. That's your concept and your idea. So they're the same thing. On level 2, does anyone recall what she said? Yes, exactly. Your deliverables and your major objectives. Another way to describe that, those are your goals. And level 3, involving the right team members. Yes, it's the major activities that support that level 2 goal. And that's definitely at level 3. Those should be assigned to stakeholders. And level 4, again, that is the what level. And Margaret, you used the term before. Level 4 is what sort of tactical tasks. She also spoke a little bit about dependencies. So you have to identify if one thing is dependent on another. And missing those obviously could create confusion, could cost money. So now I would like you to, on a next sheet of paper, and leave room if you still want to write some more about the first reflection, and write at the top of a page, how I will ensure WBS completeness. Think about the possible pitfalls and the dangers in creating your work breakdown structure. And like with all these other ones, just think at a strategic level. What are you going to do to ensure that your work breakdown structure makes sense to your project, and that it will become, Brugesh, as you said, the backbone? Okay? So take about 5 minutes and write about that. And you can continue writing. In fact, I encourage it. But just to wrap things up for today, so today we covered the approach to decomposing our work, to breaking down the work through a clear, ordered, or a hierarchical structure and thinking. Now you have the framework that you need to complete component 3. And remember that your logical, strategic thinking is really the most important thing. For our next session, you should complete a rough draft of components 2 and 3. If you haven't turned in component 1 rough draft today, that's fine, but please bring a print of each one of those 3 components with you next week. It could be a single typed page, double-spaced, 2 pages max. It could be rough. I really just want to see that you're thinking about these things that we're discussing, and the things that you are reflecting on in your journals is now being applied to your project. And absolutely, if you don't have a project idea yet, now's the time to do it. You're not too far behind. Everything is perfect. But please put in at least the time to get one good page with your ideas for components 1, 2, and 3 for next week. Next session, we're going to talk about scheduling and timelines, and then later we're going to talk about risk management and mitigation strategies. And that's it. I will see you at our next session. Thank you.